Hi everyone, hope you're all staying safe. My group and I have decided to work on the Boeing company. My name is Marco, and my other following group members, Chris, Sam, Jake, and Fabio, will be happily guiding you through this presentation. So, to start off, looking at Boeing's purpose and mission. So, just a little first most, the Boeing company is a American multinational corporation that designs, manufactures, sells aircrafts, rockets, satellites, and so much more worldwide, as it was founded in 1916 and its current headquarters are still in Chicago. So now, focusing on Boeing's purpose and mission, the company's heavily worked towards the ability to connect, protect, explore, and inspire the world through aerospace innovation. So with this being said, Boeing's mission statement is stated to be people working together as a global enterprise for aerospace industry leadership. As you can see from this, the company's objectives are heavily concerned with continuing to improve lives, global reach, high quality products, and people empowerment. Moving on forward, looking at Boeing's general environment, a very handy analysis that we worked towards this was a PESTEL analysis, which focuses on the political, economical, social, environmental, and legal, and one more I forgot, technological. So all these factors play a major role that enabled us to find these operating challenges that the Boeing company would come across in the predominant macro environment other than from its competitive forces. For instance, look at the situation if an industry is on the rise, showing a major increase in profits and growth, but it will not be any good for the Boeing if it's positioned in an unstable political environment. So now, with this being said, when analyzing the Boeing company, it had acquired numerous critical capabilities, and this was because the technological innovation models, the demand for Boeing's aircrafts had rose drastically. But Boeing's business is affected by various kinds of factors that differ. With that being said, technological to economical to political factors, each one plays a major influence on Boeing's business.
Chris Bem, taking a look at industry environment. Currently, Boeing operates in the commercial manufacturing, aircraft manufacturing market. There's one other major competitor, that is Airbus. The two of those companies operate 91% of the market share. Over the last several decades, Airbus has been eating into this market share, with more recent issues for Boeing being crashes of the 737 MAX, subsequent grounding of those aircrafts and cancellation of orders. Airbus has further been able to take market share. They're seeing an increase in competition internationally also. Mitsubishi out of Japan is a player in this market, and the national companies out of Russia and China participate also. New entrants, currently Boeing and Airbus operate planes that at 120 seat and up. Smaller jets, Embraer, Bombardier are now designing airplanes that fit in this market, so there's a new entrants that they have to deal with. As far as buyers and sellers, how they're dealing with those, the buyers have a lot of bargaining power. Because of regulations, they can only design a piece so different between the two companies. Airplanes so different between the two companies, so the buyers have quite a bit of bargaining power. On the supplier end, companies like Boeing do have more of an advantage because the orders are so large. If companies aren't bidding on the projects or consistently overbid, they start missing out on bids, it represents possible tremendous loss in sales. So Boeing does have an advantage in bargaining over their suppliers.
Hi, I'm Samuel, and I'll be talking about Boeing's current strategy, some of their important departments, and their assets. First, let's start with Boeing's strategy. Their current strategy that they're using, especially production-wise, is a development off of the strategy that they implemented in the early thousands. They learned how Toyota was using lean production and just-in-time techniques, and they began to implement that into their production lines so that they could ramp up production very quickly if needed and not have to spend a lot of money on expensive inventory costs. They also use a positioning strategy, so they try to position themselves very close to governments and governments' militaries, so that when a contract becomes available, they might be one or two players, so that they're kind of limiting the field just by leveraging their economies of scale and leveraging their importance to the particular government in question. For example, the United States, Boeing's an extremely important partner to the United States, so they certainly have some favorability as opposed to Airbus, which is not an American company and is the biggest competitor to Boeing. So once they have a government in their pocket per se, they certainly have an advantage because they only have one or two major competitors. Next, some of their important departments. Marketing is extremely important for Boeing, more business to business than to the end user, but end users are definitely more aware of Boeing as a company than they are Airbus, and they have or had a sterling reputation for safety. We'll see if that changes with the failure of the 737 MAX 8. Next is their production management, as I mentioned before. Going to a more lean production system helps them ramp up very quickly with production. So in the early thousands and even the late tens, Airbus was unable to fill some of their contracts, so Boeing stepped in and ate up some of that market share, and they still hold a lot of that market share today, which is extremely important. And lastly, I just want to mention their legal and HR. That'll be tested with the complications of COVID, as well as the complications with the 737 MAX planes. Lastly, I'll talk about their assets. Boeing has a substantial amount of intangible assets for a company. Their intangible assets make up around 10% of the company's total assets, and 50% of those intangible assets come in the form of distribution rights. So they may have rights to make X plane for a consumer for X amount of years, and that's extremely important for Boeing going forward because it's cash flow that they can count on. Another big part of that is the consumer base, which accounts for 23% of those intangible assets. Lastly are their tangible assets, which amount to 76.6 million. Although that number seems high, it's relatively low for how big of a company Boeing is, but that number is significantly up from last year's number of 62.5 million. And this is probably a result of them being backlogged. And so when demand is down, we'll see how their lean production strategy can adapt to lower demand. Lastly, their tangible assets. They have extremely large PP&E. Their biggest plants are in Washington State, and they have 137,000 employees across all 50 states, and they're extremely important.
Boeing's really struggling this year from a financial standpoint, primarily due to COVID-19, as well as a lot of their airplanes being grounded, and they've taken a massive hit due to the fact that now they had so many cancellations on orders for their planes. Airbus, their biggest competitor, also had a record year as far as completing orders and getting new orders lined up. So financially for Boeing, they ended up taking a loss at the end of last year, which was a huge hit for them because the previous year they had profit of over $10 billion. And as far as the other part of this, from a competitive advantage standpoint, I mean, they used to have a global stronghold. They have workforce all over the world. They have strong relationships with other businesses, but at this point in time, that's kind of in jeopardy due to the fact that they had so many passengers pass away in plane crashes, and so with their airplanes being on the ground, that competitive advantage has been taken away due to the fact that their relationships with their partners are not there anymore.
Boeing continues to utilize four main strategies to dominate the airline industries. Their first strategy is the corporate strategy. This is diversified manufacturing from commercial airlines to defense aircrafts, including fighters and bombers. Their second strategy, Boeing prides itself on research and development with major financial developments in this department. This culminates towards their corporate strategy of diversification. Their fourth and third strategy is a combination of functional and operational strategies. This is to control manufacturing process as well as develop logistics and other online platforms. These online platforms lead to strong global relationships. Boeing currently faces three main crises. One is the global trade crisis. This was started by President Donald Trump after he deemed China as a threat towards businesses in the US. Of note, Donald Trump is also the single biggest user of Boeing. What a quandary. Their second crisis comes on the wake of the 737 MAX being grounded. This was then followed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So currently Boeing is facing three crises that is decreasing their revenue and decreasing their profits. What opportunities can Boeing look towards during this crisis? To address the global trade crisis, first Boeing needs to move its manufacturing to the US. This would lead towards lean manufacturing as well as creating new jobs for US citizens as well as persons working in the US. This would also increase the government backing them and spending more money towards not only commercial airlines but also defense airlines. In terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, Boeing needs to look into increasing its revenue through smart marketing strategies. And we will discuss this further as one of our alternatives.
Looking at Boeing's strategic alternatives, first thing they could possibly look at is inventory controls from 2007 to 2020. Q1 2020 inventory went from $9.6 billion in 07 to $80 billion in Q1 2020. Even a 50% reduction in that inventory, if there are better inventory controls, represents $40 billion in liquidity, with inventory still 4x higher than 07 levels. A second possible alternative would be increase in aftermarket service. They already have components of the planes as they were the manufacturers of them. They seem to have an inventory surplus that could help them with alleviate some of the inventory stresses. And the aftermarket value of the aftermarket service is $51 billion a year currently. Also looking at margins, new manufacturers' margins in the manufacturing industry as a whole operate about 10%, aftermarket service 25%. So Boeing increasing their activity in this market could be an advantage to them.
To determine our evaluation criteria, we looked at strategic growth and profitability. One of the areas we discussed was lean manufacturing as well as diversification. Currently, with the workhorse of the 737 MAX being grounded, Boeing should look into a new design for the plane structure. This could be in combination with the COVID-19 crisis, interior remodeling. There are currently two designs being proposed for the interiors, which Boeing should look towards getting first user advantage. One is a separated seating row, and the second is a detachable capsule. This would solve Boeing's two crises. One, if a plane is about to crash, the capsule would detach and would make passengers safe. And the second, if you have separated interior seats, this would increase their potential for marketing to new customers.
When analyzing the profitability component for both the alternatives that were proposed, the key thing that we came across for the first one was that Boeing would focus on completing those back orders immediately once upon they had the ability. So they had over 4,000 back orders, and by making that change it would result to a drastic positive impact, as now that strategy for that will prevent the cancellation of thousands of flights and losing out on hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars in revenue that would be saved. So the figure below, as you can see here, represents the back order, how it's drastically rised due to the global pandemic and also from the recent plane accidents that happened with the Boeing aircrafts. So due to these factors, once those 4,000 aircrafts orders will generate about 76.6 million in revenue which means roughly about 11.55 billion in profit, and per aircraft that would result to a profit of 21 million, which is as soon as the impact of getting the customer's trust back and then also regaining their voice and also implementing those newer aircrafts with the right implementation. While looking at the second alternative, Boeing is expecting to gradually increase by rising production of their rates and generating 57 more aircrafts per month due to having more streams of income coming in. But generating 57 aircrafts monthly will result to about 684 aircrafts produced annually that will generate a profit of about 1.97 billion. And this is a plan that will lead to Boeing to rely on the U.S. airlines to return to service, as Boeing is building a timeline around this for more of an optimistic approach towards generating more revenue and gradually increasing production. And this is exemplified by their notice and change towards the drastic decrease in net profit margins that's allowing them to make the proper changes for the right actions to prosper towards an upward direction.
From the great words of Preeta Drucker, the purpose of a business is marketing and innovation. Therefore, Boeing needs to reduce its losses in the wake of these crises to increase their profitability. We looked at 3 alternative strategies and we'd like to discuss them now. The first option is increasing their revenue through sales of service. Between 2018 and 2019, Boeing grew approximately 16% for sales of service. Although their overall revenue decreased, we think if they continue this path and increase their revenue for projected 3 years at 16% per year, they would actually increase their net earnings from a paltry negative 641 million to a positive 6,401 million. Our second option would be a combination of both strategies, which would include increasing their sales on a continued path of 16%, as well as decreasing the cost of goods for manufacturing. This goes towards our strategy of lean manufacturing within the US. Along with lean manufacturing, they would also get additional funding. This would be their most beneficial strategy, as it would double their revenue within the first year. If we estimate that the cost of goods would decrease by 50%, we estimate that their manufacturing backlog would decrease by 50%. Their gross profits would increase to 7,443 million by the projected year 2023. For any company, this would be a tall task. Therefore, a simpler strategy would be just increasing their sales or service by 16% and decreasing their R&D. We estimate that Boeing could decrease their R&D budget by 10% by partnering with strategic partners, as we mentioned before. This would include persons who have already designed and separated interior as well as a detachable capsule. Over time, this would double their net earnings by 2023. There are several factors which we may not take into consideration, including inflation, lawsuits, and hopefully not another pandemic.
One thing we talked about earlier is that Boeing is in unprecedented times due to the fact that we have COVID-19 going on right now, as well as the fact that so many of their airplanes are grounded. And so one thing we looked at for their company is to shift some of their business into the aftermarket industry. And so what this would look like from a company standpoint is they would take a lot of their personnel that currently works in the commercial airline sector of the business, and we would create a whole new sector which would focus primarily on the aftermarket aspect of that. One way that we would go about doing that is We offer it up to employees and hope that they would make the decision if they wanted to go that route or not, and that really gives them initiative to be involved in this new part of the business. One thing that we would also do going forward is that we would bring in new executives and senior management that really know this industry well as doing extreme market research to understand what exactly is going on if we're going to get into this area. What that allows us to do is pinpoint new areas that we can create products that aren't there now, as well as partner with great companies that are already developing these products and have the backing of a huge company like Boeing. Going forward, we like this idea because it's going to create larger margins for the company, as well as try to help their cash flow get back to the positivity that they need because they've been suffering so greatly over the past 18 plus months. By doing this, we think that it can keep a company like Boeing, who's been around for so long and has been such a huge player in their industry, afloat and in good condition going forward.